Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back in another video from Ham on Beat, and today we're checking out responding to more JoJo's hot takes. Before we get into this, I saw something from Viz Media posted online the other day that Steel Ball Run is getting a physical English release 2025. So next year I'll be proper getting into Steel Ball Run. I can't wait. But until then, let's see what these more hot takes for JoJo's are. I did really like the first one. Be interested to see what we're doing now.
She's up there! Ham on the beat!
Hello everyone, today I'm back to take another look at your JoJo hot takes. When I first asked my community to provide their hot takes for me to respond to, I got a huge response, and the video itself ended up being a big hit. I received so many responses that a second video was a no-brainer since
I'm potentially going to be skipping some stuff here though. I don't recognize that guy and I'm not sure what's going on here. So yeah, because you guys know the rules. If we get past Stone Ocean,
I have a ton of topics to choose from here. Like with the first video, this will contain spoilers for every part of JoJo, but the topics will be ordered by part so you'll know when you have to stop watching to avoid getting spoiled.
Mate! Yo! Ham on Beat! What a legend! Thank you.
Our first
I think that's the first time he said that that's a yo!
Topic deals with part 1. They say Speedwagon is an extremely overrated character since all he does is sit back and watch while everything is going on.
What?
Now, of course, I have to disagree since Speedwagon is one of my favorite JoJo characters. While he is certainly a character that remains mostly on the sidelines, I do think Speedwagon's emotional support can't be understated.
Definitely. My god, he's always backing him up.
Remember that Jonathan is a person who has felt rejected by everyone around him despite always trying to do good. And Speedwagon was one of the few people to recognize the strength of Jonathan's heart, and from that moment he became incredibly loyal to him.
Yeah, like instantly. The hat was cool as well, though, we gotta admit.
Jonathan's entire life was destroyed by Dio, and Speedwagon is one of the few people he had left. I really think the trio of Jonathan, Zeppeli, and Speedwagon is one of the most underrated protagonist groups in the series.
I love it. I love the dynamic with the three. So sick. Like, part 1 and part 2 are so good.
I feel like Speedwagon's role also improved over time, since I like the older Speedwagon even more.
And the generational thing where the Speedwagon Corporation's still helping. You know,
he serves as the main connecting thread between part 1 and 2, and the story even introduces him before any other characters. And part 2 really showed his devotion to the Joestar family, which I've always thought was very touching. So overall, I disagree with the hot take, and I can't bring myself to dislike Speedwagon at all.
Nope.
This next one says that the explanation behind the stone mask in part 2 was unnecessary, and that it actually harmed the story by removing the supernatural aspect from vampirism. I also disagree with this take. The supernatural forces depicted in JoJo have always had an extra layer to them, often crossing boundaries between science fiction and fantasy. This is really part of JoJo's unique flavor, and I think its portrayal of vampires is part of what makes JoJo stand out. And the thing is, this idea existed already before part 2 showed the backstory of the mask. We already knew in part 1 that JoJo's vampires were not a traditional portrayal. This was directly shown with how Dio was immune to typical anti-vampire symbols like
and like the fact that they're not biting people, they're like sticking their fingers in and stuff. You know.
Crucifix. Zeppeli's explanation of Haman to Jonathan also pointed out the unique biological nature of these vampires, and how they became incompatible with the energy of the sun. So really, I just don't get this complaint at all. Next are some for part 3. First, this person says that the Unduel fight in the OVA adaptation was handled better than in the manga or the anime. I actually agree here. I think the 1993 OVA in some ways adapts the material better than the TV anime.
I need to watch these OVAs, like I need to check it out.
And in certain cases is equal to or better than the original manga. Of course, I'll always say that the manga is better overall since it's Araki's art and it doesn't have anything cut out. As we know, the OVAs only adapt certain moments from part 3 and don't show the whole journey like the manga does. And I don't think the OVAs are perfect, since some fights like the one with Vanilla Ice aren't as good as the manga. In the first half of the journey that was later adapted in 2000 is a step down in a lot of ways. I'd actually expand on this comment though, since I believe not just in Duel, but also Darby and parts of the Dio fight are handled better than the anime as well.
Right.
Part 3's anime had some pacing issues, and one of the worst offenders was the Darby fight being stretched to 2 episodes, while in the OVA we have a pretty much flawless adaptation which fits in one.
Cool.
And while the Dio fight is missing some stuff like the road roller, I love the way time stop is portrayed in it, and the extra scenes added to the fight are great. This next hot take is that Part 3's pace is good. While many people complain about Part 3 saying it's too long or too episodic, this person says it was actually handled well and the conclusion was very satisfying.
I agree.
And I agree here for the most part. I said before that the Part 3 anime has some pacing issues, but I'm referring just to the adaptation, which drags in some fights where the manga doesn't. I would call the manga's pacing spot on.
Sweet.
As for Part 3's length and it being episodic, I don't see these as negatives like many people do. Part 3 should be long, since it's a journey all across the world, and really the only way to properly portray such a thing is with it being episodic, since the Crusaders naturally have to make stops at the cities along the way. I get that the so-called Monster of the Week formula is tiring for some people, but I quite enjoy it.
Sure, sometimes I don't mind it.
Especially with the main cast of Part 3, which I adore. This format also let Araki really flesh out the ideas for stands, and I think it let the concept evolve more than it would have with fewer battles. And like the commenter says, having so many battles on such a long journey makes things like reaching Egypt and Dio's mansion feel like huge milestones.
Yeah, once they get there, you're like, oh my god, we are finally there, let's go, let's freaking fight Dio!
I feel like is the intended effect to make it feel like an epic journey. For our last Part 3 take, this person says that Jotaro actually knew he could stop time from the beginning of Part 3. They claim that Jotaro stopped time during the fight with Darby, and the reason Darby was scared of him was because he recognized it as Dio's ability. Now, I don't even know if I would classify this as a take or just as a theory, but I kind of feel like I have to respond to it because it's just not true whatsoever.
So strange.
Jotaro did not stop time until the final fight with Dio, and this fact is made very clear in the story. I've actually seen a lot of people make this claim regarding the Darby fight, but this is definitely not time stop. It is simply Star Platinum's fast speed. Even Darby's inner monologue never mentions stopping time. He only wonders if Jotaro is fast enough to pull all this off. The more important thing disproving this idea, though, is that we know what it's like for someone to learn how to stop time. According to Enya, you must believe that you can stop time for it to happen. Dio slowly made this realization and eventually could see within stop time. Jotaro didn't start to see within time stop until he learned that was Dio's ability and tried it himself. And lastly, if Jotaro had been stopping time all along this journey, Dio, as someone who can also time stop, would have surely noticed that, but there's no indication of that happening whatsoever. Next we have a hot take for Part 4. They say that you could remove half of Part 4 and it would be the same story. Now, this is something I've heard people say for years, and not even just about Part 4. You see the same kind of thing applied to other parts that have non-essential fights as well. I've always found these kinds of opinions odd since, well, yeah, you could probably remove a lot of fights in JoJo without directly impacting the plot. I just have to ask, why would you do such a thing?
Yeah.
I really just don't get the whole idea of wanting to watch anime or read manga in the most utilitarian way possible. And I feel like it's pretty self-evident that these story arcs serve a larger purpose than simply advancing the plot. Really, I can think of tons of arcs like the fight with Oingo and Boingo or the visit to Tonio's restaurant that, despite not being completely essential to the story, are both beloved segments of the manga that define that part's identity.
The thing about Part 4, I love, it's about the place, it's about the setting. 3 is about the journey, going from A to B, and Part 4 is about the actual place itself where it's set and the interesting things that go on within it, and then the fights and the stand battles and other things that's going on just adds to it. It's such an interesting concept.
Part of the whole point of Part 4 is building up the atmosphere of Morio as a setting, and simply gutting half the manga for no real reason would do nothing but harm the story. For our next hot take, this person says that Rohan is annoying and that there are plenty of other characters who deserve more stories than him. Now beyond this comment, I've actually seen this sentiment before with many people who seem to think Rohan shouldn't be the main subject of JoJo's spin-offs. These opinions range from just confusion as to why Rohan was chosen for this, to anger from some people that dislike the character. Now personally I love the spin-off, and Rohan is one of my favorite JoJo characters. I also believe that out of all the characters in JoJo, Rohan is the single best one to use for the stories Araki wants to tell. As a mangaka, Rohan is a person constantly seeking out new material, and so I think he works wonderfully as a guide through different episodic adventures like we see in the spin-off.
Definitely.
Rohan's abrasive personality has always been one of my favorite things about the character, and that's exactly the kind of character that works best here since it keeps him getting involved in conflict. And regardless of how you feel about Rohan, I think the spin-off has produced some of Araki's best one-off stories, and it's an opportunity to explore things that wouldn't normally appear in the main series. Now for part 5, this person says Pink Suit Giorno is better than Blue Suit Giorno. In case you aren't aware, this is referring to the fact that before the anime, Giorno was typically presented wearing dark blue, like in the colored manga and video games. But starting with part 5's anime adaptation in 2018, which chose to have him wear pink, he's had that as his default color ever since. Now, I don't care too much one way or the other, but some people made quite a big fuss about this when it first happened.
Really? Oh my god.
One thing I think is important for people to remember is that David Production actually reached out to Araki to choose the color schemes of the main characters, and he ended up choosing the pink for Giorno himself.
Huh.
Really, I think any color works for Giorno, but I do think Araki made a good choice here.
It's cool.
The pink is a really iconic color for him, with it being used in some of the best Giorno illustrations. For another Giorno-related hot take, this person says that while Part 5 is good, it has no effect on the JoJo bloodline, and the fact that Giorno is Dio's son is completely irrelevant to the plot. Now for starters, I just don't necessarily see all that as a bad thing. I actually like that Part 5 is relatively standalone compared to other parts, and it let the story focus on something new instead of feeling the need to make older characters a big part of the story.
Yeah, like making it continue. Like we still got some characters come back in to remind us. But this is like also reminding us that there's other stuff going on in the world at the same time.
And while Giorno being the son of Dio is not directly a big factor in the story, I think it actually serves a huge purpose thematically, which this comment and others seem to ignore. As Koichi says, Giorno is shown to be someone that carries the Joestar will by fighting for justice, despite having had no contact with his extended family. The main theme that Araki wanted to get across with Part 5 was how people reckon with fate when they're born into poor circumstances. All the main characters fit into this, but instead of being slaves to fate, they choose to live for a greater purpose. This is why Giorno being the son of Dio is so relevant, since in many ways, they're the same. Dio was also born into a bad life, but instead of striving to live as a good person in spite of that, he turned to the path of evil and wished to push others below him. Even when he met the Joestars and found a new family, he still conspired to destroy them and take their place. Dio shunned his humanity as well as his own fate, wishing he had Jonathan's life instead. Dio's rejection of his fate is the very thing that leads to his downfall, and his parallels with Giorno are very clear, with Giorno persevering despite his past and using his ambition to do something good. Instead of destroying those around him, he uplifts them and helps them overcome their past as well. For our last Part 5 one, we have a take related to probably the most controversial moment in the part, the departure of Fugo from the story. This comment says that, as unfortunate as it is, Fugo leaving was a good thing for the drama it caused in the group. And I agree here. As I've spoken about before, in Araki's original plan for the story, Fugo would have been some kind of spy for the boss, and would end up fighting the protagonists and possibly dying. Due to Araki's mental state at the time, he decided against doing this and had him leave the group instead. Now, I'm sure whatever he had planned would have been a good addition to the story, and it would probably alleviate the idea that Fugo was wasted as a character. But I actually like the portrayal of Fugo that we have, and like this comment says, I do think it strengthens the motivations of the main characters by showing one of them not willing to continue the journey.
Yeah, it shows how tough it is. Like, if one of them's like, no, I can't do it, guys. It's like, it is too much, and everyone else has that. It's like, you get that vibe. Wow, yeah, they're going through a hard time.
One is for Part 6. Here they say that the Dragon's Dream and Yo-Yo Ma arcs are overhated in terms of fights. And I agree with this. If you look up some of the most common criticisms of Part 6, they seem to come down to this segment of the story in particular, which people sort of lump together as the Punishment Ward arc. And really, after years of being in this discourse, I still don't quite get what people's issue with it is, other than just stating that it's bad. But I assume it comes down to some confusion over the number of stand users operating at once. Really though, with what we've seen from the reading comprehension of JoJo fans, it isn't surprising that people would get confused. Personally, I enjoy most of what happens in this part.
Shots fired.
The fight between Jolene and Westwood is actually one of my favorite fights in the part, just from how brutal it is. Dragon's Dream seems to be one of the most hated fights, but I never saw much wrong with it. People seem to have some kind of aversion to the feng shui concept, and based on what people say about it, I think they might just be skipping Anna Sui's explanation of it altogether. Yo-Yo Ma is another often hated one, but again, I actually like this fight since I find the enemy really funny, and I like the idea of a stand that just pretends to be your friend. Our next hot take says that Part 6 is the worst written part, with Poochie being one of the worst written villains. Now, this guy just goes on in this comment, so to sum it up, he dislikes the contrivances that carry Poochie through the story and believes they are lazy writing. First, he seems angry that Poochie coincidentally met the three sons of Dio, who are coincidentally bound by fate since Araki wanted it that way. Now, this criticism is just very strange, since they seem to both simultaneously accept the premise that fate exists within the story, but then they're angry at supposed coincidences taking place.
Which is fate.
In reality, the force that drew Dio's sons to Poochie is nothing new, and had already been established by the manga over a decade prior. As we know from Part 3, certain families in JoJo, such as the Joestars, are connected by psychic links that in some circumstances allow them to sense each other's presence. In Part 4, this idea was expanded to show that other connections like these exist.
Yeah, like stand users are drawn to each other, that's what they say, innit? Yeah, bound to meet each other, yeah.
Such as the force that draws stand users together. Of course, Part 6 is very focused on this idea, with Dio studying the reasons that people are fated to meet, and the gravity that draws them together. So it's no wonder that this force plays a big role in the story. With Poochie having absorbed the green baby and essentially becoming a Joestar, he now had a link to other people with the Joestar birthmark. Also remember that Poochie's stand had begun its transformation from White Snake to Sea Moon, and it's around this time that he starts to be surrounded by strange phenomena. As Part 6 tells us, the forces of time and gravity are intertwined, and with Poochie unlocking his gravity powers, we see time affected around him. Gravity is also directly mentioned as the force that controls fate in this world, which is very important to Poochie's plan. As Poochie got closer to Cape Canaveral, the anomalies got stronger, and the power of gravity drew him and Dio's sons together. Immediately after meeting Ngalo, Poochie directly acknowledges this force, so I don't really see how that's not made clear. Poochie was becoming a focal point of gravity, which is why fate was aligning in such a specific way. One last thing about this comment, I just want to point out this part where he says that the sons were bound by fate because Araki wanted it that way. Like, yes, that is how fiction works, the author writes things the way—
Yeah, like, that's such a silly thing to say. It's like, of course, yeah. It's not like he's taking a factual thing and writing it down and then changing bits. It's like, it's a whole piece of fiction being created by his mind.
They want it to be. Now we have a hot take related to the Part 6 ending. Here their main gripe seems to be that the ending invalidates the entire story of Part 6. They even say that you could skip Part 6 entirely since only the last chapter of it actually matters. This is really just a ridiculous criticism. The idea that because the events of Part 6 were undone in the ending, that it isn't actually necessary to watch it just doesn't make any sense. The fact that those events were overwritten was only possible because of those events themselves. And Part 6 is the result of years of build-up of JoJo's story and themes up to that point. The idea that you could just look at the last chapter, which mind you isn't actually in the final reset continuity until the last few pages, and get anything from that story is just ridiculous. And it's just as ridiculous as the idea that because what happened prior was overwritten, that it isn't still extremely important to the overall JoJo story. This next one isn't related to just one part, but applies to the whole series. Here they say that they have a problem with many of the JoJo Bros of the series, since many of them aren't even close friends with the main character at all. Now obviously I can't really disagree with this idea since it's just their opinion of certain characters, but I do want to question the whole idea of JoJo Bros to begin with. The comment seems to be working from the premise that there is meant to be an established best friend of each character and that certain characters are flawed for not fitting within that role. But there is simply no such thing as a JoJo Bro. That's a fan term purely created to fit already existing characters into.
Right.
And I really just don't get the purpose of doing such a thing if it's going to affect your enjoyment of the secondary characters. I also remember when we had the JoJo World event recently, which gave new merch and art of the main characters, who each had a secondary character with them. And a lot of people seemed to make a fuss that it was using Kakyoin instead of Polnareff or Rohan instead of Okuyasu, as if the idea of who the JoJo Bro is in each part is some established thing.
Yeah.
Now obviously it's fine to categorize characters however you want, but I just don't understand causing yourself a bunch of grief where it isn't really necessary. For part 7, we have a...
And then... Nope. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry, guys. Cool. Thank you, I'm on beat, for doing that in order. I love that you said it at the start. Like, it makes me feel... Because I know usually the videos are structured that way, but to have actually reassurance of going into that video knowing I'll know when to stop and not get spoiled. Fantastic. Thank you, Hammond Beat, for that. Some interesting hot takes there. Some funny ones. Yeah. So strange. The comment is like, he wanted them that way. It's like, yes, because he's writing it. And that's the direction, what's the story going? It's not like he's changing history or anything. He's making it up as he goes along because he is the guy that's coming up with it. But anyway, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video and want to be able to watch patron-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all there to help support the channel. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. And thank you for watching. What do you guys think of that? If you guys think of this, click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.